Hey there, I'm Scott. This is Tangents. Well, today I want to talk about purpose. And I have several meanings for this and several reasons that I want to bring it up. Stupidest one is I just rewatched The Matrix, and actually all three of the Matrix films. The fourth one is coming up at the end of the year. It's been like 20 years coming out with a new one. The second one and the third one especially kind of suck. So, the first one I like so much that I'm hoping that the fourth one will be okay. But a little cautiously optimistic, but a little nervous as well. It's just, I look at that and it's kind of, really. But the reason I mention it from there is just Agent Smith is talking about purpose, and they have this thing where programs have to have a purpose. It's purpose that and you have sort of the purpose of Neo and all this stuff. Not anything to do with the purpose that I want to talk about here, but probably one of the reasons I was kind of primed to hear that and to want to talk about it now. I watch this guy named Isaac Arthur, and he does these videos once or twice a week, and they're all sort of sci-fi, space, very advanced technology things. And one of the things that he was talking about recently was finding purpose in a post-scarcity civilization. I think a lot about this because I think this is a thing that a lot of people struggle with. I don't even think, I know it is. People, at one point in the past, life or death struggles were essentially a daily thing. Like, if you didn't do certain things, you might die. The people you care about might die. It was just a fact of life. Now, we do know, of course, that hunter-gatherer lives were not that bad. Actually, their standard of living was surprisingly good in a lot of places. Even, compared to poor people today, when I say poor, I mean especially extreme poverty, unless there was some kind of like a climatic thing, like a big drought or a particularly bad winter, that kind of thing, people generally speaking, not starving. They weren't that, they just foraged and lived decently well. And, even in terms of the amount of work that they had to put in, wasn't that much compared to today. Which probably, left them time to ponder, but also made their lives not seem, in a weird way, devoid of purpose. And I think we have a thing, I don't know if this is a general biological thing that's kind of evolved, or if it's just a human thing. I suspect it's a bit of both. But we have a thing where we kind of need to feel like what we do matters. We kind of need to feel like it is important, like we're doing stuff toward some goal. And exactly what that goal is seems to be flexible. Exactly why things would matter or what the purpose is something that you can kind of define for yourself. But people like to think that there's a purpose to things. And I think that is actually an inherent human trait, as far as I can tell. I do talk to a lot of people, and they're like, oh, well, people are religious because they need a purpose. I don't buy into that one. I do think people use religion to give purpose and meaning to life. I'm someone who was raised without religion, and it's not a void that I need to fill by any means. In fact, I would kind of argue that the people who are raised with it have this space opened up, which is filled with bullshit, like Santa Claus, and then they wake up at a certain point and they're like, oh, that's actually not real. That was bullshit. Even if they're remaining with the religion, at some point, you're a rational human being and you're probably introspecting at least a little bit. You probably start thinking, maybe this stuff is kind of bullshit. Maybe there's nothing to it. Maybe there are some inconsistencies here that just don't make sense. Maybe a lot of things that used to be filled with that are slowly evaporating because, science is filling in the gaps. And that the space for religious garbage is ever waning. But whatever that is, I feel like people they're raised in that sort of an environment, and then it disappears, and they feel this vacuum that almost needs to be filled. Seems to be a syndrome, not a universal thing, but I see this a lot. And it is an interesting thing also because people who were once religious and no longer are, people who were raised with religion and then no longer have it, I notice a lot of them get either religiously atheistic. I am non-religious. I don't even say atheist because I think atheism in the word says without, theism, which without theism, I guess you could say, if you take out the ism and you just say atheist, I guess but I'm trying to get to, if you mean without God, sure, right? I don't think the concept even makes sense on a fundamental level. Maybe this is just, when I was a kid, I watched Star Trek: The Next Generation, and in it they have Q, and Q is essentially omnipotent, omniscient, and by any measure, essentially indistinguishable from sort of a Judeo-Christian God. Many of the world's religions have gods, deities that are even less powerful than the Q. But they're not gods, they're just a civilization with, for want of a better word, extremely advanced technology. And to me, that always kind of made sense. It's like, okay, you have, to go a little step back, human beings can generate enough energy to way exceed our individual needs. We can move almost at will around the planet. We could, if you give the comparison of, say, an anthill, we could give an anthill so much, without even doing that much effort, so much energy, so many calories, that, so much food, that they could essentially thrive forever, indefinitely. Like not even close to a limited amount of stuff. Imagine if you had the equivalent for a human. You can snap your fingers and here's all the food you would ever possibly consume in the rest of your life, and we can just keep, we can do that without any effort at all, practically speaking. It's not to say it's no effort, but it's so little effort that it might as well be none. You might call that godlike. I personally just see it as, an advanced technology, more advanced than us. Now, I respect technology. I respect people who have developed civilizations that are more advanced. I definitely appreciate that, but it doesn't make them worthy of worship or anything like this. So this always kind of baffled me a little bit, like why I couldn't quite square that. I also, I have a PhD in physics, and in physics we have a certain, and I mean more broadly science, and not just in the epistemology of science, but kind of the general approach to understanding everything, which I guess is kind of epistemology, but never mind that now. In scientific thinking, really you have things that you can observe, and then you can go through this whole approach to sort of figuring out how things work. And you never quite get there. And it's one of the, I don't know if I don't look at it as a failing, but it's a limitation of science, that you can never quite get to what you would like to see. You never get the answers to everything. And even if you have the answers, you never have the definitive, absolute answer. You're always just kind of improving, getting closer and closer approximations to the ground truth, if you will. At least that's the idea. And even then, of course, you could say like all of this is a simulation and the whole, just throw everything out. When you start throwing that kind of thing into, when you allow for completely non-parsimonious actions, for completely just ad hoc throwing in garbage, you don't know anything. So if you're kind of trying to find something and you're assuming a working assumption, but your assumption is basically things are as they appear. There's nothing that's, like a intentional deception or anything like this. We can get closer and closer to the truth. I feel pretty comfortable saying that. And again, as with everything that I think, there's an error bar attached to that. It's not like I'm absolutely certain that we're getting closer and closer to the truth. It's like, oh, well, subject to a lot of new information that tells me otherwise, we are. I think that's fair to say. So science and physics looks at effects, looks at cause, looks at things that you could set up and actually measure and kind of. And so I always think also, in terms of like spirituality or whatever that is, if you wanted to define it as something, I don't see any way that that could practically work that wouldn't either be completely meaningless, which is to say there's no experiment you could conduct to measure, if you want, the soul or spiritual plane or whatever, or, and I'm not saying this is not the case, or it's real and it is subject to some set of laws of physics, it's subject to observation and detection, interaction, all of this kind of stuff. Because if it's not, what does it mean? And if, like, it's just like, okay, there's this non-interacting field that you can't ever possibly detect. You can't ever know if it's there or not. You can never prove or disprove it. And I claim that it exists. A little, a little sketchy. And especially like you're like, oh, but I feel like this. Well, okay, you feel a certain way. Does that mean anything? And if it does mean anything, is it testable? It's probably testable. And probably also, I'm just saying, like, I think probably the fact that you feel that way, more likely than not, is just an evolved system or system of systems in your brain. And, if you, it's this whole idea that if you have, it's the problem, it's another problem with the concept of God. You're like, oh, well, how do we explain the existence of the universe? Well, we're going to assume that there is this infinitely powerful, omnipotent, omniscient being that is much more complicated than the universe. And that being created the universe. Okay, but what created that being? If you have, it's this thing, I can't think of the name of this, but there's like a concept of a homonucleus, which is like an observer inside of your mind. And it's essentially like a little person watching and experiencing the world through all of this. But then how do you explain what's going on inside of that little person? It's like, it's just fundamentally recursive, I guess. And it doesn't get you anywhere. It just makes things more complicated. It's an explanation, and it's an explanation that kind of works, I guess, if you don't think about it. But as soon as you think about it, it falls apart because it explains nothing. It just adds more questions. So getting back, I am a person who, generally speaking, and I can only speak to myself here, but I, generally speaking, don't feel devoid of purpose. I don't feel an existential angst that I know a lot of people do. That's not to say that I'm not like delusional. I don't think I'm going to live forever or anything like this. And it's not to say that I've never thought about these things. I remember very distinctly when I was in high school, I was in bed, and weirdly enough, around the same time, I had a couple night terrors. This thing, I think it's called sleep paralysis, where you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't move, which is freaky as hell. And you're like, you're awake and you're trying to move your arms or something, and you feel very, very trapped, and it's extremely scary and stressful. I don't recommend it. If you've not tried it, don't try it. But I had that, and around the same time, for some reason associated in my memory, I was thinking about sort of the scale and scope of the universe. And not just in terms of its age, although the age is pretty, it's difficult to wrap your mind around how old 13 billion years is, because you can think, it's the same problem that people have, I think, with billions of dollars. You can understand a year, right? You can understand 10 years. You might even be able to understand 100 years or 1,000 years. 1,000 years, okay. It's like 10-ish lifetimes, maybe a little bit stretched beyond that. You've lived 10 years or 20 years, and then you can kind of like, okay, so it's like 5 times whatever. It's you can hold in your mind pretty easily. But when you start thinking a million years, not even a billion years, a million years. A million years is 1,000 thousands, right? Now, 1,000 years, if you're really lucky and you live to be about 100, 1,000 years is 10 human lifetimes. 10 human lifetimes you can kind of wrap your mind around. But you start thinking 1,000, 10,000 of those, and it starts stretching things, And then you think 1,000 more beyond that, and it breaks something. You can work on it. You can, and like $1 billion, you can kind of build mental models based on that. You can learn how to think in terms that are very, very big and very, very small. But innately, it's not something that people are good at. It's just not something. I mean, it makes sense because there's no, in nature, how often do you even encounter something where 10 of something matters versus you have like one of it, you have a couple of them, or you have essentially what feels like an infinite amount of something. It's just at a certain point, it's so much that you can't even wrap your mind around it because it doesn't matter. If you have 1,000 acorns or 1 billion acorns, it's probably still plenty of acorns. It's not at a certain point, and that's even true when it's on the verge of being like practically finite, and you could actually go through and exhaust that resource. While you're using it as a sort of working idea, you imagine, or you can easily imagine, that it's infinite. And if you have enough of stuff, that's not that bad of a practical working model. Now, you start thinking about it also, and it's like, okay, billions of years, and you think about whether it's the age of the Earth or just the duration of human existence on the planet, tens, hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, when you start getting to hominids, and then you start going back, and you go back to the point where multicellular life arose, and eukaryotes arose. And then at a certain point, not even that long ago, there was no oxygen. Oxygen was a poison. It fucks with your mind to think about this. There have been so many times on this planet where the world was just utterly foreign. Foreign is the wrong word. Alien to us. Certainly before oxygen came about, before photosynthesis, and the place was poisoned with oxygen, we'd all die. Couldn't live. Oxygen starts getting dumped out like toxic waste, and then it caused a mass extinction because oxygen is toxic. Even to us, but we use it, and we have mechanisms to survive it. But it's poison to things that don't. And it's mind-blowing. And then you think, like, there was time of the dinosaurs, there weren't flowers and fruits, for example, and it's kind of like, what? It fucks with. There were times when there were just giant fungi and insects that were, there was so much oxygen that insects could get much bigger, like scale of meters. And, now there's so little oxygen, they have an approach to breathing these little vents, and then I think they're called tracheoles, like little tubes that literally bring air to every cell rather than a oxygenated circulatory system. And those kinds of things just don't scale that much. So now, given the oxygen concentration of our atmosphere, they're little bugs. And yeah, you kind of look at this, but at that time, I mean, the dinosaurs, very fucking alien. Other things before that, very fucking alien. And it warps your mind to think about. So I'm in high school, I'm laying in bed thinking about this stuff. And I also started thinking, a billion years is a very long time. But there are billions of people on the planet. Okay, well, how many people are alive and aware right now, thinking about stuff? And you start thinking, well, every year, billions of years of experience are happening. If you went sequentially, person to person to person, and lived out those experiences, the total amount of experience is in the billions, approaching 10 billion. And, before 2 years are done, you've got the entire lifetime of the universe in human experience. And the world is filled with other intelligent creatures. And, when you add that all up, you're having more experiences than the entire lifetime of the universe, not even in a year, in a fraction of a year. And it fucks with you. It like blew my mind a little bit to think about this. And it also kind of, you think about the finiteness of individual human life, the number of people who existed all throughout time versus, it wasn't that long ago where you add up every human being who ever lived, and that was a number smaller than the current population of the planet. And, that also fucks with you. And you sort of, that's no longer the case, by the way, but it's not that big of a gap. And you think also, like, okay, the universe. So I was thinking about this, a billion years from now, which is not that long, the sun's output, unless we do some very serious solar engineering, the sun's output is going to start increasing, and well, it's currently slowly increasing, but at that point it will have increased to the point where Earth will become uninhabitable. And it depresses you also. It's like, shit. And I mean, like maybe single cellular life could live for a little while longer. But that's not that long. And also it's not, I mean, it's a human lifetime, obviously, very long. But in terms of the scale of the universe, not very long. And you think further, like a few billion years after that, the sun is going to expand into a red giant and engulf the Earth, which of course will already have been basically sterilized. But and again, this is all, we're not engineering it. There are, going back to Isaac Arthur, he does have episodes on technologies which could prolong this considerably, like star lifting, where you're literally pulling heavier elements out of the star, which is a crazy thing to even think about. But in principle, it's a technology that it's not only that it doesn't exceed the laws of physics, it's something that we could almost develop today, if we really wanted to. And certainly, like, you imagine humanity, if we don't die off, we're still around in a million years. If we wanted to, it would be not even a matter of lifting your fingers. It's so fucking easy to do. And it's a crazy thing also to think that that's even true if there was a global calamity if it doesn't wipe us out, pretty quickly we repopulate on the scale of hundreds of years and get our technology back. And, a million years, even if that happens, not really going to have that big of an impact, which is, it's another thought that fucks with you. And then you think about also like possible end states of the universe. So, and none of these are great because the universe has so much mass that it recollapses. You get a big crunch. That's pretty depressing. it has just enough mass to kind of stop expanding. And then everything, we have the heat death of the universe at some point, and it's just cold and dark, depressing. Or it keeps expanding and keeps accelerating, and at some point, trillions of ridiculously far into the future, but at some point, I guess it could be less depending on the parameters. At some point in the future, things are expanding so fast that atoms can't even hold together. Everything gets ripped, big rip. And I was thinking about all this stuff, and it really depressed me. I was really kind of, I guess depressed is maybe not, but it bums you out, And it certainly, I think a lot of people come to these same conclusions. There's kind of a typical human thing. You're like, okay, well, shit. I mean, it's easy to understand why people would become kind of nihilistic or depressed or just think life is pointless. But the thing that also occurred to me, I did have a brief moment of that kind of feeling, but then I quickly got past it because I was thinking, well, okay, this is all true. And I can hold that in my mind. But I also was thinking, it's not like the things you do don't matter to the people around you. I mean, you can do stuff that matters to lots of people. I mean, in principle, you can do stuff that matters to billions. If you imagine you did something that impacted everyone on the planet, that is billions of years per year of experiences. In a couple of years, you've exceeded the lifetime of the universe worth of experiences that you have influenced. And even, without getting something like that, you do something that helps somebody else. I mean, it may be very inconsequential in the scope and the scale of the universe, but to that person, it can mean the world. Which actually makes me think I really have to. Somebody asked me for a little bit of help and advice on something, and I kind of don't want to do it because it's going to be like kind of a pain, and I'm not sure it's going to help them that much. But at the same time, talking about what I'm talking about, like maybe it makes a difference to them. I should get back to them, and that should go on this afternoon probably. But I do have to say, I'm not. Rolling back, completely dropping that for a second. I mean, I have so many things pulling at my time and pulling at my life, and you're like, again, if I had an infinite amount of it, then I wouldn't feel so bad. But I'm acutely aware of how finite that is. And you're also thinking like, I do cost benefit analysis a little bit. And if I'm not doing something that really helps me or helps somebody else, and even if it helps somebody else, if it's just a little bit, it's kind of like, I have so many other things I'd rather be doing. And you just sort of, it's problematic. So anyway, I will, right after this, I will send them a message and get back to them, and probably have a call this afternoon yet another call. I have more meetings coming up, and it's kind of this is a thing that I'm trying to get out of, but I just, my life has become an endless series of meetings, and it's pretty tiring. It doesn't make me feel hopeless or devoid of purpose. And also, like, this purpose thing, I dropped that. I think it's crazy to think. It's never, even when I was younger, never even occurred to me, like, why would you have a individual purpose, like, bestowed upon you by somebody? First off, who would bestow it? But second, does that even make sense? And would you even want that? Like, okay, you're some cog in a big machine and that's your purpose. It's like, does not sound appealing to me. Doesn't sound like a thing that would happen either. Yeah. But independent of that, it never seemed like a thing. It never seemed like a thing that I would even want. And I see a lot of people who are looking for that, and I kind of ask why. And at the same time, I do feel like things do matter. I mean, to me, helping somebody does matter. Furthering my interests or like doing research on stuff that's, satisfying to me, it matters. just talking to people, having a good conversation with somebody. To me, this that I'm doing here, even if nobody was watching and listening, and certainly given that people are, I think it matters somewhat. I don't think it's like life-shattering or changes anything big in the grand scheme of things, but I think it matters. It certainly matters to me in the moment, and perhaps it matters to somebody listening or watching. But even if it doesn't, I don't feel. I think part of. I wish this was something I could convey to people, but part of it to me is just I don't feel this need that a lot of people seem to have some kind of like grand purpose for everything. And then they get this sort of ennui and like, oh, life sucks, or it's like just pointless. I think part of that honestly just comes down to I don't think the Isaac Arthur thing on purpose was talking about living in a post-scarcity society where you have so much technology, so much abundance that you don't need. You could, if you wanted to, you could sit down and play video games all day, every day, and you'd be fine. First off, I think we're pretty close. People don't seem to recognize the extent to which we're already almost there. It's not to say like there are people who have to work in order for the rest of us to survive right now. We haven't crossed that hurdle yet. But the vast, vast majority of people do things that really just don't matter. And I think this is actually, coming at it from this angle, I think this is where people get really bothered by purpose, because people know if they're doing a dumb job, you're just making copies of shit, or even say you're an attorney and you're just filling out forms or going to court or doing stuff that just in the grand scheme of things doesn't make a difference. And I'm not saying all attorneys don't. I mean, right now, the George Floyd, I can't even, the cop's name who murdered him is totally gone from my mind. It's just like, so fucking, like, it just disgusted by the whole fucking thing. And I mean, this is, dude fucking kneels on the guy's neck for 9.5 minutes. And you look at the picture on it, like the fucking look on his face, like he's just this smug, just doesn't even give a fuck that he's snuffing somebody out right there. And I mean, but I think prosecuting that guy kind of matters a little bit. It doesn't help Floyd's family, unfortunately, and it doesn't change the fact that cops murder people all the time. Cops do all sorts of things that ruin lives. Today is 4/20 as I record this. I've never tried the pot. I'm saying it, you know what it's a joke. I've never tried it though. Never have tried cannabis. I very likely never will. I hate, the idea of smoking something just is offensive to me. Maybe one day, maybe I'll try an edible. I don't know. I'm not really, I don't feel that much of a need to do it. But, maybe one day I'll just get bored and be in a position in life where I have some free time, which doesn't seem fathomable, but, and but I'm not particularly do. And I think my life will be fine if I never do. But at the same time, and I think a lot about Biden and Kamala, these are people who literally built their political careers on blood and people going to prison because of this fucking stupid drug that's I don't even think you can argue it's as bad as alcohol. Alcohol pretty easily argued to be worse. And yet people go to prison, they end up having their civil rights removed. They become literally slaves. Thank you, 13th Amendment. It doesn't go all the way to abolishing slavery. I'm never going to get over that one. It's like, we've abolished. No, you haven't abolished slavery. It literally has an explicit carve out for punishment against crime, which, it's just, even without private prisons, I mean, what the fuck? But with private prisons, I mean, double what the fuck? And then you have this stuff, though. I mean, it's like, okay, we're going to be tough on crime and get elected to do shit based on this. And tough on crime here just means people are dying. It means people are getting imprisoned. It means people are losing the right to vote and participate in our democracy. And it means stupid amounts of taxpayer money are going to housing people in prisons. When we have homeless people on the streets, you could spend less money than it costs to imprison somebody to give somebody food and shelter and clothing. It's just such a fucked up version of priorities. But anyway, being 420, I just, can't help but think like this shit should be fixed. I volunteered to try to get something passed in Arizona to decriminalize this stuff and legalize and also expunge the convictions so that people could actually get the fucking right to vote again. But it's so fucked up. And, so going back to purpose, like trying to address these kinds of things does matter. More than prosecuting somebody for murdering somebody. Trying to fix the fact that people are getting murdered by cops who we pay stupid amounts of money, incidentally. I just look at, it's hard to get away from cops here, but I look at every major city in the US spends, depending on the city's size, up to $1 billion for kind of typical cities. And then when you get to like the New Yorks, it's like $6 billion a year. You get to LA, it's like $3 billion a year for cops. If you look at the nation's police force, in terms of population and funding and resources, literally the third biggest military in the world is the United States cops. So we've got the biggest military in the world. And our military, with $700-something billion a year budget, plus other stuff that's accounted for differently, we could cut that in half and still spend more than the next biggest country, which is fucked up. We have more prisoners numerically than any other country, and our population is definitely not. China's like 1.5 billion people. We have 330 million people. Still have more prisoners. Good fucking job, people. We have more people who are disenfranchised. We have more people who are just, essentially, it's not just that we don't have civil rights, but we have idiots fucking fighting for one half of the Second Amendment, as if that was actually under threat. And then you have, at the same time, all of these places passing laws to ban, like trans kids who just want to participate in sports. They can't do it. Sometimes they're like, oh, the school was gonna get to have somebody look at little kids' fucking genitals. What the fuck? Who the fuck thinks about this shit? Why would you come up with? You would think that this was just a, honestly, like it's a demented, deranged, sick mind that comes up with doing something like that. And again, to address something that, and the worst thing is, it's not a thing that is in terms of numerical amounts, like how many people are affected by this. Not a ton of trans kids out there going into sports, not hurting anybody, and for those people that you're attacking in the process by blocking them, it's fucking up their whole life. It's I'm not saying like if that happens to you, your life will never recover, but it's a major setback as a kid. And when you're a kid, 10 years seems like forever. If you're in high school or middle school, 1 year seems like forever. So that 1 year is a big fucking deal to people, and they're getting fucked out of it by people who just, most of them, I don't even think there's even really a problem that they sit there and talk about. It's just like a very small population that they can beat the shit out of and get credit for that somehow out of a bunch of sick fucks. And it kills me. It kills me. Like, people fight for that. You have all of these places also that are stripping people of voting rights and working actively to, like Arizona. We have this great thing called PEVL, Permanent Early Voter List. You get on that, and then every time there's an election, you get a ballot mailed to you. and you mail it back. It's really fucking awesome. It works pretty well. People are trying to get people taken off of that. And there's literally I don't know if it's the House or the Senate, but one of the legislative bodies of the state today is debating about like taking a bunch of people off the rolls for that, based on, you know, not being in a couple of elections. And then you look at the number of elections that it takes to in these bills. It's like, okay, well, if you're not voting in a couple of elections, maybe you have to re-register, which is stupid as fuck, by the way. You shouldn't have to register to vote. It should just be like automatic as a citizen. But and it should be if there is a registration, it should be instantaneous. It's like, okay, you are a citizen. You can prove you are. You want a ballot? No, we're not going to give you two, but you got your ballot. Done. No, you know, delay between that or anything like that. It's insane that that's a thing that happens. It's insane that we take the right away from prisoners, from convicts to vote. Yeah, and I mean this one also, like these are things that I sit there and I say this, and then you get so much pushback from people who are like, oh yeah, you totally have to take the right away from people to vote. You don't want serial killers or rapists to vote. Well, actually, you know, I mean, first off, if a serial killer voting fucks up your election, something is wrong, right? You know, a serial killer is a tiny fraction of the population. There are more rapists, but there's still a relatively small fraction of the population. Letting them vote, it's not, I mean, it's not like it's killing anyone. Taking the right away to vote for people who have a non-violent drug conviction, fucking ruining people's lives. And again, I'm trying to be careful there not to say like it's not ruining your life in the sense that you can't ever recover and as you know, but it's taking away a big fucking thing and putting a big roadblock in people's civil rights. There are states that are sitting there right now taking away the right to protest. Like, I think it was Florida has this thing where some ridiculously low number, like 7 people congregating, was a felony. You know, I mean, or could be interpreted as one. Yeah, I mean, it's like, what the fuck is wrong with people? Like, why would you make something like that? And it's all based on these distorted ideas of, you know, risks that are not really risks, things that, you know, like if people want to protest, they should fucking protest. If people want to, you know, and in fact, this is going to be the last thing because running out of time here, but okay. A couple days ago, somebody was talking about, you know, like, oh, I don't condone rioting, but, you know, understand it. And then they were talking to somebody who was probably a bot on Twitter, but you know, but bot being like a sock puppet, but you know, using the sort of hacker cracker in, you know, kind of fuzzy terminology. But never mind, I'm just going to call him a bot. Talking to them, they said that, and then I said, you know, actually, I do kind of condone rioting. And you're like, well, what do you mean you condone? Why would you say that, Scott? I'm not saying that it's good to burn places down. I'm not saying it's good to do the things that people associate with rioting. But I am saying that rioting is the language of the unheard. And when people have no other recourse, when people aren't allowed to vote or are given options to vote which don't change things, when people, you know, are constantly facing, like literally cops are killing people, multiple people every day since I think it's been like an average of like 3 people a day since the George Floyd, I keep calling it the George Floyd trial. Obviously he's not on trial. But since the trial against the dude who fucking murdered him started, something like 3 people a day killed by cops. And yeah, it's like a lot of those cops are getting paid administrative leave. They're not getting any real consequences. You know, it's fucked up. But I'm losing my... So, you know, if this kind of shit is happening, if this verdict comes back badly, you know, if or worse, this asshole gets some kind of punishment, and then that's more than a slap on the wrist, and then appeals it and gets that taken away, you know, by all fucking means, riot, burn the fucking police stations down. You know, I mean, don't hurt anybody. I'm not condoning that at all, but if you're going to burn some cop cars or a police station, you know, I have zero problem with that. And I have zero problem with that partially because, it's a situation where, like, I'm not saying it's hopeless. I do think things can change, but this shit has been going on for so long. And I've talked about this before. I said it, I didn't mean to say it. I keep trying not to say it, but I always want to say that. But, like you look at Serpico. Dude talking about corruption in like the 60s. It's been a little while, right? Still a problem. People have tried to address it. Still a problem. Rodney King was in the 90s, 30 years ago. There are people who are like damn near middle age who grew up watching that riot and watching that trial, and things have not really improved. I mean, if that's the situation and there's nothing else to do, I mean, like protests are great. People ignore protests. Burning down a police station, people notice that a little bit more. And maybe also like, I don't really want to go like too into this. I'm not like advocating crime here, but I certainly am not saying that I condemn somebody for doing something that is frankly kind of a natural consequence and something that even a rational person might do given the circumstances and given no other outlet and given no other recourse, given no other approach to fixing things. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to hire a black police chief who say, and in fact, I'm not even saying that they don't want to reform things. Maybe they do. But then they get in the position and they realize, oh, the police unions have got contracts that are so strong, they have so much political power that you just can't fucking fix it. Even if you're well-intentioned. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I say all cops are bad, all cops are bastards. Because even if you go into the police force with good intentions, even if you go in meaning to fix things, meaning to reform the system will just stretch and warp you to such an extent that either you're going to leave, in which case, maybe you were not a bastard, but you got the fuck out, or if you're staying in there, it's going to push you, nudge you. Over time, you're going to do bad things. Whether you're not, and maybe you're not going to kneel on somebody's neck until they die for 10 minutes, but maybe, or not, okay, 9 minutes and 30 seconds I can hear somebody going like, Scott, it wasn't 10 minutes. Not, basically, fucking 10 minutes. But if you're not the person doing that, maybe you're one of the cops that's standing by watching it. Or maybe you're one of the cops who doesn't make sure that that person gets kicked off the fucking force. You're one of the cops that, if you're ratting, air quotes, on another cop, you're breaking the thin blue line. We have this line that protects, I mean, it's a fucking gang is what it is. It's a politically powerful, massively funded gang. And again, like every city, hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars going into this thing. Even like small towns and villages, you look at the budgets, and as a fraction of municipal budgets, it's like a third or more in a lot of places that just don't have resources going to bullshit, going to having these gangs that terrorize people and kill people. It's fucked up. It bothers me. So anyway, with that, I'm a little past the time that I was hoping to get out of here. I'm gonna put a cork in this for now. Might come back to the purpose thing again, but hopefully, even if I didn't get deep into that, scraped the surface. With that, thank you very much for listening or watching, and say Jen. Oh wait, record scratch and come back. Got my second Pfizer shot a couple days ago, and feeling fine, by the way, but very much looking forward to and hoping that we don't end up with vaccine evading strains rather. But gonna have lunch with Gil soon. It's like crazy. It's mind blowing. It's mind blowing because it's like over a year, and it's one of these things that's like you know, it was normal to just go every week and hang out. It was like every once in a while something would come up and either I couldn't or he couldn't, and it'd be like 2 weeks, and that was like, oh, this is so long. Uh, Over a year. You know. But I'm looking forward to and hoping for things to improve, and I'm really fucking hoping, you know, I'm so nervous about the possibility of vaccine evading strains. But I'm seeing my mom and sister soon. Hopefully things return. Hopefully that's just a ridiculous fear that's not going to come to fruition. I will say this, like India right now, holy shit, the cases there are, you know, just like through the roof and growing. And God, this is a thing that just fucking disgusts me. Pfizer, so I've talked about, oh, okay, I'm not gonna say it. These mRNA vaccines, taxpayer money went into developing them, first off. And when I say went into, I don't mean like a couple drops. I mean the bulk of the money that went into developing this shit was taxpayer funded. So it should be for the betterment of all people, I would hope. But instead, it's going to these pharmaceutical companies to make them more profitable. And in this case, getting a ton of government money to do something that, you know, we paid for the research. The actual cost of production is not that great. And, you know, it irritates the shit out of me. But they have these patents on these vaccines. And so, for example, Pfizer has a patent, and you can know what the sequence is, but you can't reproduce the vaccine, which means that there are a bunch of drug companies in India who could easily make exactly, and when I say exactly, I mean basically exactly the same thing as the Pfizer vaccine, and they could cover a bunch of people and tamp this shit down. They can't do it. It's illegal. And it's illegal partially because the US and the EU have been like really strong arming people and keeping this from being released. Yeah, like, again, thanks for that. That's great, guys. And so India is now very fucked up, and it's not the only place. There are a lot of countries where they just don't have a ton of money, don't have a ton of resources, and they're just fucked. So, you know, good show. Like, more people will die despite in some sense getting, like me seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, more people will die this year than died last year of this disease, and probably by a significant margin. It's just they will be in different places, which is one of the reasons also, I mean, just from the perspective of self-interest, all those places are places where this thing is going to keep spreading, keep mutating, keep evolving, and it could come back and bite us in the ass. So even if you're a greedy fucking bastard and you don't want to, you want to make as much money as possible, it doesn't matter if something happens there and then it spreads back to us and then it makes the vaccine completely, you know, irrelevant. But anyway, with that, thank you as always. Zaijian.